Now, always and forever to the fight back. Some organizing news first, again from very different sectors. Uber and Lyft drivers in Massachusetts have officially unionized in what the Boston Globe described as the first-in-the-nation move, setting the stage for collective bargaining between rideshare drivers and the platforms they work for. The newly certified ABT Drivers Union said it will represent roughly 70,000 drivers across the state after receiving recognition from the Massachusetts Department of Labor Relations. According to the report, the union can now begin negotiating with companies like Uber and Lyft over wages, job security, and working conditions. The organizing effort follows a 2024 Massachusetts ballot initiative that created a legal pathway for rideshare drivers, who are classified as independent contractors rather than employees, to unionize. The ABT Drivers Union is backed by the SEIU's 32BJ chapter and the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. Organizers say drivers are seeking better pay, benefits, working conditions, while also fighting unfair deactivations and demanding a real voice in making important decisions that affect our jobs. The Globe noted that the unionization push comes as drivers face increasing uncertainty over automation and the future of app-based work, including the expansion of autonomous vehicle testing. Union leaders frame the certification as a historic breakthrough for gig workers nationally, saying drivers are now positioned to pursue the first-ever collective bargaining agreement in the U.S. rideshare industry. And workers at Dark Horse Comics have announced plans to unionize under the banner Dark Horse Workers United, seeking voluntary recognition from company leadership by June 3rd. Organizing with the CWA, the group says its goals include improving job security, wages, and benefits, increasing workplace transparency and equity, and gaining a seat at the table in decisions affecting employees. In a statement, the union wrote, quote, "We are the workers that make Dark Horse a home to the unique comics, creators, and creative principles known around the world." Workers also argue that despite Dark Horse's reputation for supporting creator rights, quote, "We are regularly undercompensated and discounted, despite our essential role in the publishing process." The union campaign comes amid significant upheaval at the publisher. In a social media post, Dark Horse Workers United stated, quote, "The looming uncertainty from recent layoffs, wage and hiring freezes, change in leadership power, emergence of AI, and return to office policies, despite their economic impact on employees, have fueled us to organize and collectively address our concerns." Workers emphasize they're seeking a democratic workplace and said the union is fighting for equitable pay, workplace democracy, and a continued commitment to creator-owned comics. The organizing effort follows months of turmoil for the company after the departure of founder Mike Richardson and the announced closure of Dark Horse's retail arm, Things from Another World. According to reports, 59 eligible employees signed the recognition letter sent to interim CEO Jay Comas, and if the company declines voluntary recognition, workers plan to petition the NLRB for an election. They have a petition going you can sign that I'll post in the description. Public reaction online has been overwhelmingly supportive, with readers and comics fans posting messages such as "Solidarity Forever" and "Comics needs more unions." Importantly, the union clarified that Dark Horse Workers United is not calling for a boycott of the publisher at this time. And in very possible upcoming strike action, nearly 1,000 members of the UAW at American Axle and Manufacturing in Three Rivers, Michigan, are preparing for a possible strike ahead of their May 31st contract deadline, rallying around the slogan, "No axles, no trucks." Workers say a walkout could severely disrupt production at GM because the plant supplies axles for GM trucks. The strike authorization passed with 98% support, reflecting deep frustration over years of concessions, low wages, and deteriorating working conditions. As electrician John Krause explained, workers are determined to fight for no concessions, no tiers, and increasing job security. Many workers say they're still struggling from concessions made during the 2008 financial crisis to keep the plant open. According to Krause, "We took the concessions. Some went as low as $14.50 an hour, while newer hires once started at just $10 an hour. Workers also lost their pensions, which were replaced with a weaker 401k style plan. And today, top pay is reportedly only about $22 an hour after years on the job." Employee Rosie Dodge criticized management culture at the plant, saying workers are treated like bodies rather than people through constant manpower moves. The dispute also centers on quality of life issues, including mandatory overtime and lack of paid sick leave. Dodge said one of the biggest concerns is that workers don't have sick days, despite Michigan's new earned sick time law. Online reactions from current and former workers echoed those complaints, with one Reddit commenter claiming, quote, 70-plus weeks for most of the year were required for much of the plant. Workers argue the company has continued expanding and rewarding executives while demanding sacrifices from employees who help keep the business alive during difficult years. Now to Union Busting 101. Out to Colorado, where the lockout of more than 1,700 union workers at Cargill's Fort Morgan beef processing plant is beginning to reverberate throughout the food supply chain, raising concerns about beef production, prices, and local economic impacts. The dispute began after workers represented by Teamsters Local 455 overwhelmingly rejected the company's contract offer, with union officials saying employees voted 90% against the contract. Shortly afterward, workers were barred from the facility. According to Union Secretary-Treasurer Dean Modeker, the minute we left the parking lot, they put up the barriers. They put out security, and they're refusing to allow us back at the facility, even though our members just want to work. The company, meanwhile, said it acted because continued uncertainty around a potential work stoppage creates challenges to operating safely, responsibly, and reliably, and has redirected cattle shipments to facilities in Kansas, Nebraska, and Texas to minimize disruption. Still, analysts warn that the shutdown removes a meaningful chunk of processing capacity at a time when the U.S. cattle supply is already near historic lows. Jennifer Martin of Colorado State University told the Colorado Sun, quote, any disruption and any impact on prices is going to take some time to see because of the way the industry is structured, which creates a bit of a buffer for many supply chain shocks. Workers say the fight is about far more than wages, citing safety, dignity, and working conditions inside the plant. Bathroom access reportedly became a major issue during negotiations, with allegations that some workers avoided requesting breaks out of fear of retaliation. The conflict has also drawn attention because Cargill recently announced AI-driven production monitoring technology designed to increase efficiency and track worker performance in real time. Critics argue the technology intensifies pressure on employees in an already demanding environment. And in an example of the pure snakes employers can be, employees at Wizards of the Coast received a letter from management ahead of a June 2nd unionization vote, warning that organizing with the CWA could leave workers with more, the same, or less than they have now. The company argued that your voice is strongest when it is heard directly, not through a third party, while stressing that unionization was a personal decision. The effort involves developers working on Magic the Gathering Arena, after Wizards and parent company Hasbro declined to voluntarily recognize the union by a May 1st deadline. The letter explained that if workers unionize, the CWA would represent employees in bargaining over wages, benefits, scheduling, and other terms and conditions of employment, but warned that outcomes are not predetermined and negotiations can be lengthy, 465 days on average. Management also stated that all the benefits and perks you currently enjoy would be on the bargaining table, meaning employees could end up with, again, more, the same, or less than you have now. If workers reject the union, the company said it would continue working directly with employees with a much greater degree of flexibility than a typically rigid union contract. Meanwhile, here in New York, lawmakers are poised to approve sweeping pension reforms that would allow many public school teachers to retire earlier, marking a major victory for unions that have spent years fighting changes made under the state's controversial Tier 6 retirement system. Under the agreement reached by Governor Kathy Hochul and legislative leaders, teachers with 30 years of service would be able to retire at 58 instead of 63, while employee contribution rates would also be reduced for many workers. Supporters argue the reforms are necessary to address recruitment and retention problems in public education and other public sector jobs, where workers have long complained that Tier 6 offers significantly worse benefits than earlier pension tiers. For example, in my case, I'm Tier 4, which allows me to retire at 55 with 30 years of service. So we were fighting for equity for those who just had the misfortune to be hired later. Labor unions celebrated the deal as a major organizing win after years of pressure campaigns and rallies across the state. New York State United Teachers President Melinda Person called the agreement proof that when workers organize and stay united, change is possible, adding, quote, "This is a victory for public workers across New York." Union leaders argued that the original Tier 6 system, enacted in 2012, pushed retirement too far out and forced newer workers to contribute more while receiving less generous benefits. Critics, however, warn the pension overhaul could create major financial burdens for local governments and taxpayers. The package is projected to cost roughly $557 million annually, with about $440 million falling on municipalities and school districts rather than the state itself. Fiscal watchdogs and conservative critics argue the changes could lead to higher property taxes, budget cuts, or deferred public projects. Some opponents also argue the reforms disproportionately benefit public sector workers at a time when many private sector employees lack guaranteed pensions altogether. The reforms represent one of the most significant reversals of the Cuomo-era Tier 6 pension system since it was created more than a decade ago. The legislation also restructures contribution rates and raises overtime limits used in pension calculations for police officers, firefighters, and other public employees. The changes underscore the growing political influence of organized labor in Albany as unions continue pushing for broader rollbacks of earlier pension restrictions. So critics treat these pension reforms as a pure cost, while ignoring the cost of failing to recruit and retain teachers. Schools across New York are already struggling to keep experienced educators, and forcing people to work until 63 only makes the profession less attractive. After 30 years in the classroom, retirement should be considered earned. Someone starting at 22, like I did, would still work until nearly 60 under the new rules, hardly an unreasonable standard. The reforms also benefit more than workers themselves. Stable schools, experienced teachers, and lower turnover strengthen communities in the broader economy. Constant recruitment, understaffing, and burnout carry major financial costs too. Better pensions help retain skilled educators and reduce those long-term expenses. And the argument that public workers should lose retirement security because many private sector workers already have lost theirs gets things backwards. The answer is not to lower standards for everyone, but to protect and expand retirement dignity wherever possible. And the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, CBTU, used this recent convention to argue that labor rights and civil rights are one fight, warning that attacks on unions, voting rights, diversity initiatives are all interconnected struggles facing working people. Speakers at the gathering described the labor movement as being under one of its most serious threats in decades, with AFL-CIO President Liz Shuler declaring, quote, "What we've seen this past year, the past few weeks alone, are the most heinous attacks in a generation on working people, and especially against black workers in this country." CBTU leaders stressed that black workers have historically been at the center of the country's most important labor and social justice battles, from the Memphis sanitation strike to anti-apartheid organizing drives and today's union drives. CBTU, founded in 1972, was created to bridge the labor and civil rights movements after many black unionists became frustrated with what they saw as the labor establishment's failure to fully confront racism and political attacks on black communities. Convention speakers emphasized that racial unity is our strength and argued that solidarity across racial and ethnic lines is essential to resisting authoritarian politics and corporate power. Quote, "Workers today are facing some of the worst conditions imaginable," CBTU President Reverend Terrence L. Melvin declared from the main stage. "The rising cost of living has priced many out of obtaining basic necessities. Healthcare has become unavailable for millions. The price of gas has bled many of our bank accounts. Yet somehow there is always enough money to enrich the richest few." Melvin then said the Trump administration is demolishing unions with the stroke of a pen and a deaf ear to the workers, a reference to executive orders that have shredded union contracts and canceled bargaining rights for more than 1 million public service workers. Quote, "Now is not the time to bend," he said. "Now is not the time to forget the obstacles we have hurdled and the victories we have achieved. Instead, we need to lean on those victories to help pave the way for new accomplishments." The piece also connects today's organizing to a long history of black labor activism in the U.S. People's World notes that black workers helped build some of the country's strongest industrial unions and repeatedly linked workplace struggles to broader fights for equality and democracy. Quote, "Labor education will get us out of the mess we're in," Melvin said. "We need a new plan. We're not going back to 2024 or 2020. We need a new plan that has the labor movement front and center of everything going on in this country. As long as we organize, educate, and reach workers where they are, we're still in the game."